Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The most interesting subplot for me related to Tyson Fury's fight with Francesco Pianeta is actually completely unrelated to the fight itself. And that is, of course, the whole what next piece for Tyson Fury. And all roads related to that do seem to lead to Deontay Wilder. We know he's going to be in Belfast, ringside for the fight, commentating for BT. And the thread of all of this that's been the most fascinating part is how Anthony Joshua's name and his failure to recently make a fight with Deontay Wilder is being used to help prop up and sell the idea of a Wilder-Fury fight. Joshua is now being vilified at every turn quite deliberately, and this certainly hasn't escaped his own attention. So he's taken some time out of training camp to respond to the situation on social media, saying, "My enemies want to be friends with my other enemies." And I'm going to come back to this a bit later on. But think about it like this. In July, when the suggestion of Fury fighting Wilder came up for the first time, the general reaction was, it's a pretty bold and risky move so early into Fury's comeback, especially if the fight was going to be at the back end of 2018. He'd been out of the ring for more than 2.5 years, and in that time he'd become obese, had drug, drink and mental health issues. He's had to lose a whole lot of weight, and he's only just had his first comeback fight in June, and that was a bit of a farce against Sefer Seferi. So, this Pianeta fight then going on to Deontay Wilder, a lot of people, including myself, were sort of saying, is this too soon? But what we've seen since is certain lines related to Anthony Joshua being pushed repeatedly by the Fury and Wilder camps. And this is actually helping move the narrative away from the whole it's too soon for Fury and Wilder to fight. And some of the lines that they've been peddling, quite effectively I might add, have been that the fight was so easy to negotiate. Easiest negotiations ever, they said. No roadblocks. Everyone is happy. Everyone's fair. Everyone just, wanted to get this done. And Wilder, he's been pushing that Anthony Joshua has embarrassed the UK. And Fury is doing what a true champion should. So that indicates that Joshua, as a champion, didn't act like a champion. And that's certainly been something Wilder's been pushing. And you may have noted that Frank Warren, who is Tyson Fury's promoter, he's repeatedly telling fans that Anthony Joshua turned down a guaranteed $80 million for a 2-fight deal with Wilder. So $50 million minimum for the first fight, and if he lost that, he'd get $30 million in the rematch. So that's where the minimum part comes from. And he knows this, he says, because Wilder's co-manager Shelley Finkel consulted with him during negotiations because they were potentially looking to, have the fight on BT for the UK side of the coin if the fight or the $50 million offer was picked up and control of the fight was secured by Team Wilder. And adding in the whole, well, I was involved in this, I saw what happened, I saw the contract, I won't know what was going on. It does make some of his statements a little bit harder to refute because he's inserted himself into it because he's had the in from Shelley Finkel. His statements become harder to refute, and it allows him to keep repeating what he's repeating at every opportunity, and he's making the most of it. And more recently, Tyson Fury, he's been saying that most likely a fight with Anthony Joshua won't happen because he doesn't deal with crooks, doesn't deal with dossers, and doesn't deal with people who are unreasonable and greedy. And Warren, he's certainly been echoing some of the sentiment around this sort of unreasonableness and greedy. And all this talk and chatter mentioning Joshua time after time, it's serving multiple purposes. So with the narrative side of the situation, slowly but surely over the past couple of weeks, it has been shifting to more of a lineal champ versus WBC champ scenario, which is, where they want to position it, as opposed to the prospect of an undercooked Fury taking on Wilder too soon, because obviously that becomes a little bit harder to sell. Perhaps where this has been the most effective for them through this campaign of repeat, is through those comments about Joshua being greedy, about him being scared, an embarrassment to the UK, and they're actually, without saying it, implying that they are everything that Joshua is not, and that they're prepared to do everything Joshua was not prepared to do. They've been prepared to be reasonable. They've put everything on the line to give fans a mega event. So in a way, vilifying Joshua at every turn has been a tactic to boost their own reputations and really start generating some hype for the fight. Whether you agree with the tactics and the statements that sit behind them, it's a whole nother matter. And it's most likely influenced by which of the fighters that you support. You're going to have a bias that starts from that direction. But largely what's happening, it's not designed to win you over specifically. It's designed to sort of build the narrative for the fight, draw in the casual fan. And those casual fans probably weren't paying much attention or nearly as much attention as you were to the blow-by-blow public fiasco that ended up being the failed Wilder and Joshua negotiations. They will have no clue who did what and when and really who was responsible. Most casual fans are probably unaware that Deontay Wilder was on the verge of signing a contract. But what they're seeing and hearing now, if they're paying any attention, is that the whole situation was being positioned as Joshua avoided him, and Fury is going to save face for the UK and take on the big bad WBC champion. And if you consistently paint a picture that, the generally considered number one heavyweight in the world avoided you, well, that's going to get some people interested, and some people will start believing that. And if a Wilder-Fury fight is a pay-per-view event in America, you can better believe and expect to see and hear more of the same sort of statements popping up and being repeated all over the place, and then repeated some more, and repeated some more after that. And what could happen over time is prone to happening with, in the media and on social media, and sort of with the sort of lapsing of time. If certain things are said enough, it starts to become an accepted fact, an accepted part of the backstory. Well, at least it could in the minds of fans who are sort of coming in later, those who only dip in and dip out of the sport, in the build up to a big fight, and then you don't see them again until the next pay-per-view event. I'm sure you know plenty of fans who sort of fit that mold. They could be won over by some of this talk, some of this rhetoric. They might buy it. They might end up having a negative perception of Anthony Joshua. The other purpose that all this Anthony Joshua talk serves is pettiness. Boxing is an incredibly petty sport. Fighters and promoters that love to twist the knife on rivals, especially if they can get the opportunity to do so repeatedly, largely with no blowback, and especially against a rival who's the cash cow of the division, which is the case in this scenario. They're able to just, sort of make little cuts here and there on his reputation and sort of besmirch his name. And what's been happening is they've been getting away with it. And Wilder and Fury, along with their management, they have been pulling a decent tag team of this whole situation. And of course, it's for their own benefit and at the expense of Joshua's reputation. And let's face it, Anthony Joshua is not a mug, nor are his people. He's got some good people around him. They can see the play that's being made here. Hence the social media post. My enemies want to be friends with my other enemies. And I must admit, I was a little surprised that the post was made at all. Partly because he's deep into his camp for an upcoming fight with Alexander Povetkin. Usually fighters, either go dark in training camp or their social media is tailored around their training camp. You see various bits and pieces popping up of them training, making comments, and it's all targeted and focused towards building towards their fight. Not around making comments that others are making at their expense. And the other thing with this is that he's acknowledged that his enemies are making friends with each other. That could be seen to indicate what's been labelled as a smear campaign by some is working. The post is an acknowledgement of that to some extent. Otherwise, why would it be written? Why would it even go up? It's been effective to some degree. Some will probably go to the extreme end of town and say Joshua is shook and, he sort of, doesn't know what to make of it. He's the one under the sort of pressure here. It's probably overstating things to go that far. But what we can say is he wasn't prepared to just let the situation pass without comment. I'm also sure that Joshua and his people, they must have noted the irony of his name being mentioned just as much, or if not more, than Francesco Pianetta's during the Fury-Pianetta fight week. In some ways, that's, incredibly funny that that's actually happening. Probably doesn't say much about Pianetta and sort of his stock in the division. There's not actually much that Joshua or his promoter Eddie Hearn can really do about what's going on to try counter Joshua's name being raised and dragged through the mud repeatedly. Simply because while they're being mentioned a lot, really it's sort of peripheral to the messages that Wilder and Fury and co are pushing home. They're trying to paint a picture that, champions are fighting champions, the best fighting the best, all this sort of stuff. They're using Anthony Joshua's name to help tell that message, but Joshua's, name and his part in it isn't the key message. It's just helping tell that message. So, it's certainly an interesting situation and expect it to continue. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.